Welcome to the very first episode of the Make Heaven Crowded podcast, where we dive deep into each chapter of the Bible.
Yeah.
And what better place to start than with Genesis,
Oh, totally.
chapter 1,
Yeah, the foundation of it all.
the foundation of it all.
It really is the bedrock, isn't it? So much unfolds from these initial verses.
Exactly. It's like the blueprint for everything that follows.
Yeah.
So we're going to take this verse by verse.
Okay.
Genesis 1.1.
Right?
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Simple, yet incredibly powerful, right?
Right from the start, you're hit with this fundamental truth. God, as the creator,
Yes.
it's a direct challenge to any notion that the universe just happened by chance.
It's so foundational.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the Hebrew word for God used here,
Okay.
Elohim,
Uh-huh.
it's actually plural, hinting at the concept of the Trinity,
Right.
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
which becomes much clearer in the New Testament.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It shows how interconnected the Bible is. Even in the very first verse, you have these seeds of later theological concepts.
Okay. So let's move on to verse 2.
All right.
And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Now we're introduced to a state of chaos, of formlessness,
Right.
but then this powerful image of the Spirit of God hovering over the waters, bringing order. What do you make of that?
It's such a vivid picture, isn't it? It reminds me of how artists often talk about finding inspiration in the midst of chaos.
Yeah.
And here you have the Spirit, the very breath of God, breathing life into this formless void.
It's almost poetic.
Yeah.
And then, bam, verse 3.
Okay.
And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
Mm.
The power of God's spoken word.
Wow.
What do you think about light being created before the sun?
It's intriguing, isn't it? Some scholars believe this refers to a primordial light distinct from the sun we know. Others see it as a metaphorical representation of God's presence illuminating the darkness. Either way, it highlights God's power to create something out of absolutely nothing.
Wow.
In theological terms, this is called creatio ex nihilo.
Wow. Creatio ex nihilo. I love that.
Yeah.
So God doesn't need pre-existing materials. He simply speaks.
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah.
And then in verse 4, he separates the light from the darkness.
Establishing order, defining boundaries. It's a theme that continues throughout the creation account.
Exactly. Day and night, light and darkness, all set in motion by God's command. And in verse 5, we're told, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day.
Right.
It's interesting that the evening comes before the morning, isn't it? I've heard some scholars say that this is intentional, reflecting the ancient Hebrew understanding of a day beginning at sunset.
That's a great observation. It shows how important it is to understand the cultural context of the Bible.
Yeah.
And it also reminds us that God's ways are not always our ways.
Okay, on to day 2, verses 6 through 8. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. Now, the word firmament can be a bit confusing for modern readers.
Right.
It essentially refers to the sky or the atmosphere that separates the waters below, like oceans and rivers, from the waters above, like rain clouds.
It's easy to picture this as a solid dome, like an upside-down bowl, but that's not really what the text is saying.
Okay.
The Hebrew word used here, rakia, actually suggests something more like an expanse or a stretching out.
So it's not about a physical barrier, but rather a separation, a division between the spaces.
Exactly. And that's an important distinction because it helps us to avoid misinterpretations that lead to ideas like the earth being flat, which of course isn't supported by science, or a deeper understanding of the biblical text.
Right.
Yeah,
It's about understanding the language in its context, not taking everything literally.
precisely. It's about reading with wisdom and discernment.
And that leads us to day 3, verses 9 to 13, where we see the emergence of land and vegetation.
Okay.
And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. So we have the separation of land and sea, followed by the creation of plants, all sorts of plants, each producing after his kind, meaning they reproduce according to their own specific type.
It's fascinating to see how order emerges from chaos in stages.
Mhm.
First, light and darkness are separated. Then the waters above and below are divided.
Right.
And now we have the distinction between land and sea, followed by the bursting forth of plant life. There's this beautiful sense of progression and purpose.
Yeah, it's all happening through God's spoken word, which is just mind-blowing.
It really underscores the power and creativity of God.
Yeah.
He doesn't need tools or materials. He simply speaks and it becomes reality.
That brings us to day 4, verses 14 to 19, where we see the creation of the sun, moon, and stars. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the 4th day. So now we have these celestial bodies, not just as sources of light, but also as markers of time and seasons. It's like God is setting the stage for human life, creating a rhythm and order to the universe.
And remember, this is a time when many cultures worship the sun and moon as gods. By placing their creation on day 4 after plants had already appeared, the text subtly undermines those beliefs. It's a reminder that even these majestic celestial bodies are simply creations of the one true God.
It's a subtle but powerful statement about who's really in control.
Exactly. The sun and moon are magnificent, yes, but they are ultimately subservient to the God who created them.
What a great point. Okay, so we've reached day 5, verses 20 to 23, where we encounter the creation of sea creatures and birds.
Right.
And God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the 5th day."
This is where we see the incredible diversity of life exploding onto the scene. The waters teem with creatures of all shapes and sizes, and the skies fill with birds. It's like a symphony of creation, each element playing its part in this grand orchestration.
I love that imagery, a symphony of creation. And once again, we see that phrase, "after their kind,"
Yeah.
emphasizing the distinct categories of creatures that God created.
It's a clear indication that God intended for each type of creature to reproduce according to its own unique blueprint, not to evolve gradually from one form into another.
So you're saying that even from a scientific perspective, there's this idea of boundaries, of distinct categories within the natural world.
Exactly. The creation account doesn't align with the idea of gradual evolution from a common ancestor. It emphasizes the distinct and purposeful creation of each kind of organism.
Yeah, we're getting into some really interesting territory here.
Yep.
So before we dive into day 6 and the creation of humanity, we'll take a short break.
All right.
Join us for part 2, where we'll continue unpacking the wonders of Genesis chapter 1. Welcome back to Make Heaven Crowded.
It's great to be back diving deeper into Genesis 1.
We left off with the creation of the fish and birds, a symphony of life filling the seas and skies.
And now we come to day 6, the pinnacle of creation week, the day God creates land animals and humanity.
Okay, let's jump into verses 24 and 25.
Yep.
And God said, "Let the earth bring forth a living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. So first we have land animals, all sorts of creatures, each reproducing according to its kind, just as we saw with the plants and sea life.
It's like God is establishing this fundamental principle of order and categorization within the natural world.
And it's interesting how the text keeps emphasizing that God saw that it was good after each stage of creation. Like he's taking delight in his handiwork, appreciating the beauty and diversity he's bringing into being.
Absolutely. It conveys a sense of joy and satisfaction in the creative process. And then we come to the climax of the chapter, the creation of humanity.
Verses 26 and 27. Here we
Yeah.
go. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the seas, over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. This is where things get really profound. What's your take on this idea of humans being made in God's image?
It's one of the most significant concepts in the entire Bible. It sets humanity apart from all other creatures. It means we're not just biological beings, we're also spiritual beings bearing the imprint of our Creator.
So it's not about physical resemblance, right? God is spirit after all.
Exactly. It's about reflecting God's character and attributes in a unique way. For example, we have the capacity for love, for creativity, for moral reasoning, all qualities that point back to the nature of God himself.
And we're given this incredible responsibility, dominion over the earth. But as we talked about earlier, it's not about exploitation, it's about stewardship, right?
Precisely. We're called to care for creation, to manage it wisely and responsibly, as if we were tending a garden that belongs to someone else, in this case to God.
It's a humbling thought, isn't it? We're not the ultimate owners, just the caretakers.
Yes, and that should shape our attitude towards the environment, towards animals, toward the resources we've been given. We're accountable to God for how we use them.
And in verse 27, we see the creation of both male and female, both made in God's image. What are your thoughts on the significance of this?
It's foundational to the biblical understanding of gender. Male and female are distinct creations, both equally valuable and both essential to God's plan for humanity. They complement each other, reflecting different aspects of God's character and nature.
It's a powerful affirmation of the inherent dignity and worth of both men and women.
Absolutely. And it challenges any ideology that seeks to blur or erase those distinctions.
Now in verse 28, we see God giving humanity their first commands. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So we have the mandate to be fruitful and multiply, a clear affirmation of the importance of family and procreation.
It's about participating in the ongoing work of creation, bringing new life into the world.
And then we have that familiar command to subdue the earth, which, as we've discussed, is about responsible stewardship, not reckless exploitation.
It's about understanding that we have a unique role to play in caring for creation, in cultivating its potential, and ensuring its flourishing.
And finally, we come to the end of day 6 and the culmination of creation week, verses 29 and 30. And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree, yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat. And it was so. So God provides for both humanity and animals, giving us plants as food. It's a picture of harmony and abundance, a world where all creatures are provided for.
It points back to the goodness of God's original creation, a world without scarcity or struggle for survival.
And then the final verse of the chapter, verse 31.
Right.
And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. What a powerful statement. God looks at all he has created, and he declares it very good. It's a resounding affirmation of the beauty, order, and purposefulness of his creation.
It's a stark contrast to the brokenness and suffering we see in the world today. It reminds us that things weren't always this way. Sin and death entered the picture later, but God's original design was flawless, a perfect reflection of his character and glory.
So as we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive into Genesis 1, let's take a moment to reflect on the key themes we've encountered.
We've seen God's incredible power and creativity on display, his ability to speak the universe into being, to establish order from chaos, to create life in all its diversity.
We've explored the profound implications of humanity being made in God's image, called to reflect his character and to steward his creation.
And we've been reminded of the inherent goodness of God's original design, even in a world that's been marred by sin and brokenness.
So join us for part 3, where we'll consider the lasting impact of these truths, exploring how Genesis 1 shapes our understanding of who we are, where we come from, and where we're going.
And as always, we encourage you to check out the Make Heaven Crowded YouTube channel to watch the full chapter visualized. It's a fantastic way to immerse yourself in this epic story of creation.
We'll see you in part 3. Welcome back to Make Heaven Crowded.
Glad to be here for the final part of our deep dive into Genesis 1.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From the initial chaos to the emergence of light, the separation of land and sea, the creation of plants and animals, and finally, the crowning achievement humanity made in the image of God.
It's been quite a journey. And now as we wrap up, I think it's important to consider the implications of all this.
Right. Like, what does Genesis 1 tell us about who we are, why we're here, And what our purpose is.
Well, first and foremost, it tells us that we're not accidents. We're not the product of random chance or blind forces. We were intentionally created by a loving God who had a specific plan for us.
And that plan involves reflecting his image in the world, being stewards of his creation, and living in harmony with each other and with nature.
Exactly. Genesis 1 provides a framework for understanding our place in the universe. We're not just here to consume and exploit. We're here to cultivate, to create, to care for the gift that God has given us.
It's a high calling, but it's also an incredible privilege to think that we as humans have been entrusted with this responsibility.
It's humbling, isn't it? And it should inspire us to live differently, to approach our lives with a sense of purpose and intentionality.
One of the things that struck me most about Genesis 1 is the emphasis on God's goodness. He looks at everything he's created and he declares it very good. He's saying, this is my masterpiece. This is what I intended. This is how it's supposed to be.
That's such a powerful point. And it's so important to remember that, especially when we look around and see so much brokenness and suffering in the world.
Right? Because it reminds us that things weren't always this way. Sin and death have corrupted God's perfect design, but that doesn't mean we have to give in to despair.
Exactly. The story of Genesis 1 points us to a hope, a future where God will ultimately restore all things to their original beauty and harmony.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Genesis chapter 1, I want to encourage you to continue exploring this incredible chapter on your own.
Yes, reread it, meditate on it, pray over it. Let it shape your worldview, your understanding of yourself, your relationship with God and with the world around you.
And be sure to check out the Make Heaven Crowded YouTube channel where you can watch the full chapter visualized. It's a stunning and immersive way to experience the story of creation.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through Genesis 1.
We'll see you next time on Make Heaven Crowded for our deep dive into Genesis chapter 2.